is Indian country today?
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patti Hunt. The U.S. government is seeking to take away mineral rights from a tribe in North Dakota. The Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, also known as the three affiliated tribes, say they plan on filing a federal lawsuit to protect their ownership of the minerals beneath the Missouri riverbed. That river runs through the Berthold Reservation. Chairman Mark Fox says he was shocked when he received this news during the pandemic when they were, quote, struggling so hard anyway. In late May, Daniel Giorgiani, the solicitor for the Department of Interior, issued an opinion insisting the state is the owner of the riverbed and not the tribes. Yet Giorgiani's opinion goes against three previous memos that confirmed the tribe's ownership of the Missouri River. Memos date back as far back as 1936, and the most recent was issued in 2017. That memo contained 16 pages of information on history, culture, and treaties, but was suspended for, quote, a lack of adequate background. Giorgiani's opinion only included 2 pages of history. One Canadian province is sharing their progress when it comes to addressing the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's been a year since Canada launched a national inquiry into the issue with a report called Reclaiming Power and Place. It was released alongside a report specific to Quebec to give special attention to the violence against women and girls in that province. Quebec has made significant efforts in training employees to combat stereotypes, create a culturally safe environment, and to ensure the sustainability of Indigenous police services. The province is taking extra precautions to make sure women and children are safe during the pandemic by increasing security in shelter facilities and funding family support services. The government of Quebec set aside $200 million in the current budget to enhance the safety of women and children over the next 5 years. It's an all-hands-on-deck approach by the Indian Health Service to address the potential surge in hospitalized and critically ill COVID-19 patients. IHS announced Tuesday that it will be sending out a critical care response team to educate staff and provide the latest information on treating COVID-19 patients. This mobilized team will be on call and able to deploy to wherever they are needed across Indian country. The team is funded for 12 months. Fire Creek Services Company, a native-owned small business, will provide the care. And now for the latest numbers of COVID-19 in Indian country, let's go to Jordan Bennett-Bigay, our Washington editor. Jordan?
Yate Patty, Yate Shikisto Shidine. We have updates of COVID-19 cases and deaths from 4 tribes. And here are the latest numbers from our database. There are 8,186 positive confirmed cases and 324 deaths in the Indian health system. Again, that is a total of 8,186 positive confirmed cases and 324 deaths as of this morning. The Osage Nation, Oklahoma, reported 6 new cases. These new cases are tribal employees. One of the 6 individuals attended a funeral and the tribe's outdoor election event. The tribe is working now with the state health department to conduct contact tracing, and the tribe now has a total of 13 positive confirmed cases. The Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians in Mississippi saw a rise in 14 cases and 2 additional deaths. This brings the total to 679 cases for the tribe and 35 deaths in total. The White Mountain Apache tribe in Arizona reported 35 more cases and 1 additional death. This gives the tribe a total of 837 cases and 9 deaths. And the Navajo Nation, that spans across Arizona and parts of New Mexico and Utah, announced 128 new cases and 7 deaths. Tribal officials say they have a total of 5,661 cases and 259 deaths. The Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez announced at a virtual town hall that they will be pausing the 57-hour weekend lockdown starting this weekend. But he says this doesn't mean we let our guards down because the virus is still within the communities there. The 7-day nightly curfew will still continue for the tribe, and they also encourage to keep doing the preventative measures too, such as washing hands and social distancing and wearing face masks.
All right, so for the first weekend in a long time, Navajo Nation will not be on lockdown. Jordan Bennett-Bigay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Patty.
And we'll be right back.
This is Indian Country Today.
Welcome back. Today is the anniversary of the 19th Amendment. 101 years ago today, June 4th, 1919, Congress passed a constitutional amendment that recognized the right of women to vote. The joint resolution sent to the states a constitutional amendment to secure the right. Of course, Native American women were not included in that right. American Indians were not U.S. citizens until 1924, and even then, many states set up barriers to voting that made it all but impossible. There is a parallel history here. White women were pushing for the right to vote in 1919 because they wanted to have a say in the 1920 election. Here's the ironic twist. The 1920 election was one defined by a flu pandemic and the First World War. Indeed, women's groups did rally that year, and in some 9 weeks, roughly 1/3 of eligible white women voters cast their ballots. The history of voting for American Indians and Alaska Natives didn't start until decades later. In the 1950s, Congress was busy drafting the Termination Act to do away with tribes. So in 1956, Helen Peterson, the executive director of the National Congress of American Indians, wrote that the threats of termination, which would end the federal government's role in working with tribes, was a driving force for Native Americans to cast ballots. She said voting was essential because, quote, Indians are their own best spokesmen, their own best diplomats, but they can exercise those roles effectively only in proportion to their opportunities to exchange information and to use their combined strength and concerted voice. Well, a lot has happened since then. In 2016, the Native vote made history when more Native Americans and Alaska Natives ran for office than ever before. And for the first time, more women than men ran for office. Finally, in 2018, the first Native women were elected to Congress, more than a century after the first white women were elected. Representatives Deb Haaland and Sharice Davids made history when they entered the halls of Congress. Haaland is Laguna Pueblo and represents New Mexico. Davids is Ho-Chunk and she represents Kansas. Yet before Haaland and Davis, there was someone else. In every generation, there is someone who goes first, and in 1988, that person was Jeannie Givens. Givens is Coeur d'Alene, and she served in the Idaho state legislature until the late 80s before deciding to run for Congress. She was the first Native American woman to dip her toes in a national election. Before this pandemic hit, our editor, Mark Trehant, sat down with Jeannie Givens to give a closer look at her political life and to hear her thoughts on this upcoming election.
Welcome to Phoenix, Jeannie. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I was thinking, what must have been like on election night 2018 when the first Native American women were elected to Congress? What through your mind?
I had an incredible lump in my throat. I teared up, and then the next day, or the next days when they were sworn in, that was the most touching for me. There's an image of Sharice David and anyway,
Deb Haaland, yeah.
Deb Haaland, and they're hugging, and they're on the floor of the Capitol, and they're hugging, and they are crying, and those tears are infectious. But it was a great moment for Native American women, and a real giant step, and a long overdue moment for America.
When you first ran, what did you think about your role in history and being the first to run and the first to possibly serve in Congress?
Well, that didn't weigh on me, and because that is an awesome responsibility to be the first. I just felt like I wanted to take the next step out of the legislature. I wanted to do the next thing, and I felt I had something to contribute. And then I was realizing that, oh my goodness, I would be the first Native American woman elected, and that was an awesome responsibility. I came to realize.
You grew up in a household where politics must have been regular form of entertainment almost.
Yes. I grew up in a household where my Uncle Joe was a regular visitor to our home, and I would go with my uncle to gatherings, and one specifically I remember was going to the Harrison Senior Citizens outdoor picnic. And so Joe was given the microphone, Uncle Joe was given the microphone, and he started beating the drum. And my little job was to just get in the middle of the people and start dancing. And then they applauded, and it was nice. And then he gave his speech. So afterwards, he gave me a stack of flyers, brochures to hand out. So I was raised in the environment of pushing ideas on people. And yes, politics comes naturally when you're raised that way.
And Joe Gary served both in the Idaho House of Representatives and the Idaho Senate, and was a candidate for the United States Senate
Yes.
while being president of the National Congress of American Indians.
While being chairman of the Coeur d'Alene tribe for 20 years. And he was an amazing person, but the times, I believe those times in the 50s and the 60s required a person to be so multifaceted. And with the threat of termination, he kicked it into gear. He wasn't going to sit back. There was war to be waged. So he got very involved.
In a way, it's not a surprise that Idaho is where this first played out, because for such a small state in terms of Native population, there's been a lot of participation in politics.
Mm-hmm. We're very lucky. We're very lucky. And I was in a district that was not just the reservation. It was all the small towns of North Idaho. So the Coeur d'Alene Reservation was maybe 1/8 of the district. And so that was a good thing for me. I hope it was a good thing for the Idaho voters to be introduced to a person who was different, who was came with a different set of values, a different history, but same appreciation of Idaho.
We're here at Papago Park, so every once in a while we'll hear things, but we just keep going. What was it like serving in the Idaho legislature?
Well, there were so many interesting people. I was elected as a Democrat, and the House of Representatives was 3/4 Republican. It was so tilted Republican. But I learned that I could get along with all different kinds of people. There were tough Republicans, and but I learned that I could take it, but I could dish it back to them too. And I think a lot is settled with a sense of humor. And if you can get into a good conversation with someone and have a funny story to share, to exchange, it builds the relationship.
You've spent a lot of time in your career on civil rights issues. How do you think that's unfolded as you look back in time?
I think that North Idaho at the time, those were critical times. The Aryan nations had set down their flag in North Idaho, and they were present. They were present in public gatherings. They would be present in the 4th of July parade. I mean, they were taunting. They were taunting the public, and the public had just become complacent and quiet. And people decided that we need to organize, and we need to decide what we're going to stand up for. And I think that was a challenge for the community, and to be part of that, and to develop community conversations about difference and why it's not so scary. It's good to learn about people who have a different religion and a different race and a different culture. And I think that what we did as supporters of human rights, we advanced the thinking in North Idaho. And we think statewide, the state grew. It was worthwhile. I'd do it again.
Well, in so many ways, North Idaho actually kind of exercised that whole strain of thought in a way that I just think that today we have these same conversations coming back, and there are lessons from Idaho that would seem relevant.
I think the best message for fighting racism is to immediately stand up and to speak out. And I think at that point you need to have every person in elective office go on record about how they feel about human rights, civil rights, people who are different, and let's get that conversation going. So it's a very good thing.
Across the country, more Native American, well, this last election, more Native American women than men ran for office. The growth of candidates, how's that?
I think it's exciting. I think it's very exciting. And I'm just so delighted to see so many people running, not just for Congress, but starting out running in the legislature, running for county commission, running for statewide office. That is very exciting. What it does is it builds the information baseline that many people have done it before. They can share their knowledge with the newcomers, and we need to have a place at the table, whether it's in the state, whether it's in a city, whether it's in Congress.
What do you remember about the legislature in terms of actually those kind of hostile moments?
Well, I was the sponsor to make Martin Luther King Day a state holiday. Only Mississippi and Idaho were the last states holding out and not making it a holiday and recognizing the contributions of Dr. King. I felt very, very strongly about it. And I remember one Republican House member who walked up to me, big guy from Twin Falls, and he said, "Tell me you're not going to introduce that bill again this year." And I said, "What's your problem? Just vote no if you don't want it." He said, "No, I've just got all this explaining to do, and it's all this touchy-feely stuff. I don't want you to do this." And I said, "For you. You want me to not introduce this bill for you." I said, "I'm going to introduce it. Just do what you're going to do."
Couldn't have him pass it secretly to avoid it, huh?
No. Oh.
What other fights do you remember from the legislature?
I had an interesting bill was coming out of the House, and the bill was to have public schools teach creationism, and creationism would be the more biblical story of creation rather than the scientific one that is in the science books. So I thought, well, I'm not supportive of that because I didn't believe in I do believe in the separation of church and state. So what I did was I put on my beaded outfit the day the bill came through, and I said, all right, I will vote for this bill on one condition. I want the creation story of the Coeur d'Alene tribe. I want the creation story of the Kootenays, the Nez Perce, the Shoshone Paiutes, and the Shoshone Bannock. And I will tell you my tribe's creation story. So I told them the story about the Great Flood and the little beavers and the otter that dug down and got the sand and created an island, and they were shocked. They were just shocked. So I think I helped defeat the bill.
You know, states have a lot of tribal people don't think of state government as a route to power. They see tribal governments and federal government. What did you learn from working with the state to try to improve lives in the community?
Well, I understood and learned very quickly how important appropriations are to schools and for roads and for health care. We have the health districts in Idaho, and they're very, very important. So there's a direct benefit that you see very quickly from your appropriations. And then when you pass the laws, that next June is the enactment time. You see whether or not you've raised or lowered the drinking age. You make decisions that really impact people. And with that, you carry that to a federal race. And certainly the laws are very important at the federal level. They mean something. It's just not Congress not doing anything. They enact laws that cause you to either pay more taxes or less taxes, or you have more freedoms or less freedoms. So you just carry those ideas with you. You learn a lot. That's a good place to start at the state level.
One of the changes, I think, across the West is that in many communities, particularly rural Western states, tribes are now large employers.
Yes.
How's that changed things?
Well, in North Idaho, the Coeur d'Alene tribe is now the largest employer in North Idaho. And that just shook up the good old boy club. And now people come down to Plummer, the tribal headquarters, to talk and meet. And the tribe is not expected to run up to Coeur d'Alene every other day to be involved. One element of our tribe is that we give back a lot of money to the community and to needy groups all over. So we have a situation now where many of the people and the entities need money, and they come to the tribe and ask. So we have a really good giving program. Part of the gaming agreement is that 10% shall be used for education, but it's the education of our choice.
Jeannie Givens, the first Native woman to ever run for Congress and to help change the landscape that is today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Mark Hunt joins us now. Mark, Jeannie Givens is quite a story. What's the arc of the overall story?
Thank you, and thank you for having me, Patty. I'm glad to be here. You know, it's really interesting. About the same time that Jeannie Givens was running for Congress, Carol Juneau was running for the state legislature in Montana. And one of the reasons she said she wanted to run was she's a member of Mandan Hidatsa Rikara tribes, or also in the news today. And she couldn't get involved with local politics because she was living on the Blackfeet Reservation and not a member of that tribe. So she ran for state office and won, and immediately started to look for ways to bring more people into the process. And today we see Montana as having a higher percentage of representation than the state population. And I think that really shows the power of what's possible when women get involved. We really have seen since Jeannie Givens, a number of women run for Congress, and every time they got a little closer, they got a little closer. Of course, Carol Juneau's daughter, Denise Juneau, was one of the most recent to run for Congress in Montana. Now we're at the point where in this current election cycle, we have a candidate for the first time for the United States Senate, Paulette Jordan. We have other possibilities of women. It's very likely that in the next Congress, there could be more than 2 women in Congress. In state legislatures, I think it's really significant that Native women are in state legislatures at a higher percentage than the general population. So the general population is just about 30% of women in state legislatures. And for Native Americans, it's about 40%. So you can really see how Native American women have taken the idea of leadership in elective office, executed it, and figured out a way to make it work.
That's very true in Arizona, because there were several Native American women who served in the House of Representatives in Arizona. When they termed out, then they ran for the Senate and they won.
And they have a caucus, and they're able to do things in that caucus. And it's not just being in the legislature, but being in a position where they can make decisions and impact. And you see that all the time. I mean, one of the most significant stories that I still think needs to be told is how many of the Native women, in this last cycle especially, the very first thing they did was work on missing and murdered Indigenous women issues. You see it with Representative Ruth Buffalo in North Dakota. You saw it in the Arizona legislature, in many forms across the country. It's just been a really stunning success story.
And finally, raising the awareness. Minnesota, I think there are about 8 states that now have a task force dedicated to missing and murdered Indigenous women, and some actually have allocations for that funding.
Right, and more than that, they're getting the conversation changed in a bigger way, where people are talking about it and looking at data collection, looking at how things can be improved. It's not just about raising the issue, but it's about looking for solutions.
So Native women, and again on this anniversary of the amendment, and the 19th Amendment that allowed women to vote, Native women are certainly catching up, would you say?
I think more than catching up, I would say leading. And one of the most extraordinary things from the last election was how Native women formed networks, and they started helping each other, reaching out to each other. It was great to watch.
All right, Mark Hunt, thank you so much. And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patti Hunt. Join us again tomorrow.
This is Indian Country Today.